All right. Hello, everyone. I am on vacation. So I am not near my microphone, so I just have my phone. But I still wanted to do this presentation about the principles of war. We'll be going over the famous thinkers and the principles of war that nation states have adopted. So, as usual, fuck the U.S. military. Fuck the U.S. military. Hold on, I'm gonna pause it and make sure the audio's good. We're back, and I took my phone case off, and hopefully that annoying noise is no longer there. So, again, fuck the U.S. military. So, the first guy we're gonna talk about, actually the more recent guy, JFC Fuller. Unfortunately, he was a fascist, but his military ideas are still worth paying attention to, especially because they make up the foundation of most Western military principles, and if we're going to fight them, we need to understand that. He was a military commander, and he developed what are called the 9 Principles of War, and those principles are used in different variations, with other principles substituted in and out. The U.S. combines some of them together, so they combine 4 of them into 2 separate principles, and then they add 2 more to give a more comprehensive view, kind of war, and what they do makes sense. We're gonna take a look at some very similar principles, or doctrines, I should say, and gonna look at some ones that are really different, that come from different traditions. So here we go. So his 1925 arrangement, might have forgotten an E there. I'm bad at spelling. I'm dyslexic. Okay, so we have direction, concentration, distribution, determination, surprise, endurance, mobility, offensive action, and security. And so one of the things that you'll see throughout the principles is slightly different names for the same concepts, but the names attempt to elaborate more. So that in itself is also useful, but when the names are more elaborate, they also are harder to remember. And so this is actually a nice, clean pedagogy of the principles, just having these single, simple terms. So obviously, with direction, we have overall aim. One thing to consider is that this is not just within your own structure. If you are working with other military structures of, let's say, like different nations, you also have to come to an agreement on this stuff, or else you'll just be wasting time and resources and lives. Concentration. So this is one that gets combined with some of the other ones in the US, but so one thing to notice with this definition and how it's going to differ from later definitions is the focus on effort versus firepower, or specifically troop concentration. So there's always these subtle differences between how these principles are regurgitated, and it has to do with the different doctrines that people are either developing this stuff under, or, the doctrines of the nation states they're being applied to. So, distribution, where and how will the commander position their force? So this one is probably one of the more unique ones to Fuller. This kind of gets grouped into other principles kind of later on. Determination, the will to fight, the will to preserve, or the will to persevere, sorry, and the will to win must be maintained. So, um, we're talking about morale here. So, this is something that I see not talked about much um, in military discussions outside of like the really heavy doctrine stuff that comes straight from the U.S. military's like top like kind of thinkers. I see it kind of ignored by the more amateur side, and especially on the political left. I see essentially no acknowledgement of morale, and not just in a direct traditional military confrontation, but on the the movement itself. And in I'm not talking about morale as in people feeling good, and like how a lot of the left like thinks that or the US left thinks that they just have to be happy and have fun to be rebellious, which I hear so much, and this kind of like constant hope core, instead of acknowledging reality. But also like, how do you it's not about this like denying reality, but it's how do you build the morale to face dangerous things. It's not about happiness or feeling good. It's how do you make someone kind of comfortable with being with like suffering temporarily, essentially, to be able to accomplish an objective. That's this very important strategic element, and it's not something that is just inherent. It's something that systems need to constantly address, and actions need to constantly address. Um, there's on top of kind of when you have like new units and stuff, you want to go through processes where you battle harden them in like kind of slow ways. And a huge reason for that is not just the training aspect of that realistic scenario of training, that hardens them. It's that morale building it does. So that's something that always has to be paid attention to when planning campaigns, planning anything military related. Is how do you uh, have operations, not just how does the commands and the logistics support morale, but how does the operations, how does the missions support the morale of the soldiers? Um, you don't want to have too much too quickly for soldiers that aren't ready. You will demoralize them, and so it's something that you want to carefully build with the right missions, the right time, with the right preparation. So we have surprise, and so this is one that's Fuller is kind of different about this than how a lot of the nation state doctrine ends up utilizing this idea. They prefer to think of it as deception than surprise, because I think I mean there's probably different stuff with language going on, but surprise is very action based kind of, and deception is a more long term process, and so it's you're going to think of surprise more in an actual tactical battle sense versus in an operational and strategic sense of deceiving a commander, an enemy commander, and where your troop concentrations are and stuff like that. So, um, but I mean the definition provided does adequately fulfill kind of what deception is talking about too. So, endurance. This is another one that's a little specific to Fuller. It kind of gets grouped into other stuff later on with other with them when nations form their doctrines. So the force's resistance to pressure. This is measured by the force's ability to anticipate complications and threats. This is enhanced by planning on how best to avoid, overcome, or negate them, and then properly educating and training the forces in these methods. So I have a chart later on that kind of actually compares and contrasts some of this stuff. So I'll talk a little bit more about that stuff then, the comparing and contrasting. Mobility, in U.S. doctrines refer to it as maneuver. It's always the maneuver element, one of the key things. Weird. Okay. That was a weird spam text I got. Security, ability to perform or protect the force from threats. Sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. So yeah, this is pretty fundamental to all things military related and something I never see the left do ever. The U.S. left, to be clear. But even the left, as they do things in other countries, and a lot of European countries, I do not see proper security being taken. And I'm not just talking about operational security, I'm talking about physical security. I mean, there is a huge lack of operational security too, but physical security is extremely lacking. So, Fuller, he further breaks these down into three groups. Principles of control. So, sorry, I actually wrote the terminology used by UK and Britain for this. So that's direction, selection, and maintenance of aim. Maintenance of morale is shit. What was the determination? Yeah, determination, and um, flexibility or mobility. Um, so I believe they kind of the UK and Britain includes something kind of group one of these other ones into flexibility there. I think it's endurance because I think that's a huge part of being flexible to them is having endurance. Um, so then you have the principles of pressure, um, concentration. Is that the term Fuller uses? Yeah, yes. So that's what Fuller uses. They use UK and Britain use. I think well, I forget what they Britain and the UK use, but US uses mass for that. You have surprise and offensive action. And wait, yeah, okay, no. I just kind of did I skip this by accident? Yeah. Oops. Yeah, I shit. I'm sorry. So this is like, yeah, this is so important. And so defense kind of works on this paradox. It is the technically the stronger form. You need less troops to defend an area than you need to take the position. But there's a huge trade-off, and the defense ultimately makes you weaker. You're ultimately being invaded if you're on the defense. So, uh, really, when you kind of look at kind of strategic and operational aspects, the offense is what needs to be done. And even on a modern defensive strategy, you're not defending the entire time. You're defending in depth. You're setting up what like three collapsible lines essentially, or two collapsible lines into a third that holds, and then you're counterattacking. You're going on the offensive, and even in so-called non-conventional guerrilla type stuff that's going on, even now, Hezbollah, um, Palestinians, they're not just on the defense. They're defending in depth. This is so clear with Hezbollah how they just uh, let the Israelis push through the southern part of the country and wait for their lines to get overextended, harass them, and then they start really escalating the attacks and actually going on a type of like non-conventional offensive to push the Israelis back because they don't need uh, traditional armor formations and stuff like that to push them back once they extend far enough into, especially with the terrain on their side. So um, they're still being mobile and using these traditional conventional military approaches, just with different dispersion and different engagement criteria and tactics. But the grand strategy is still the same. So going back to, sorry, then so the final third grouping is principles of resistance, and you have your distribution, endurance, and security. Um, haven't really expanded that much on these. I think the viewing these principles in these groups of three, in this case, is very very valuable. You can think of these first three kind of as your kind of your control measures. I know it says control, but like I've talked a lot about control measures on the channel, um, and there's a lot involved in properly controlling large military units, and so this is helpful for that. And so I mean, with direction specifically with this, like it's less of about having a specific control measure for it and more that uh it's helpful for when you don't have control measures or when you don't have specific orders, uh when you don't have restrictive orders. It's and you want permissive, you want things to generally be permissive, your orders, and so you want a clear direction, and you want your leaders under you to understand that direction so that they can carry out that direction without having to have a ton of control. So that is, it's not just about having control, it's about being able to uh, outsource that control, um, but there's still centralization that's required, which a lot of leftists, I have to kind of, they're like, I have to like drag them kicking and screaming into this stuff. It's like, I've seen a lot of people act like that, just because of the kind of tactical decentralization that is more necessary because of technology now in warfare. They mistake that for decentralization in in war itself, and at the strategic and operational level, which requires even more centralization. Um, Especially with modern firepower, being able to keep your units in control. It's essential to present fratricide. So, for principles of pressure, this is you can think a lot about your firepower and how you're using your firepower, the different ways to employ it, and your principles of resistance are essentially like not just defensive, but how do you actually resist enemy attack? And not just enemy attack, resist enemy force, because this applies on the offensive too. So the big reason why this is structured this way is Fuller. I mean, he was kind of a loon. He was an occultist. He believed in like a lot of mysticism and pseudoscience, like the law of threes. While I like the organizational structure of these principles, I really like the group of three and how each one has three, and so it's like a nice little organization, but it doesn't like he has this like very mystical idea behind it, why it's important, and not just that it's just like a convenient way for our brain to process it. Um, so moving on, we're gonna jump way back in time. Um, I like to do things like in weird orders. You'll start to understand that about me. Sorry. So Sun Tzu. Um, you don't have to read Sun Tzu. His ideas are captured in the modern military thinkers in Clausewitz and Jomini. I mean, Jomini literally wrote a summary on the art of war, and I'd say, I mean, I yet to get to that one. I've read Sun Tzu's, but I have to say, Jomini's is probably like just better to read, especially if it's Sun Tzu's so short. Jomini can probably just cover literally everything, and then expand on it more, and especially with more modern context. And Sun Tzu, I mean, it's a combination of like strategy and tactics. The book, that's what people kind of fail to talk about, because he does talk about specific stuff that just doesn't matter at all. And so when you get to those lines, you can kind of just forget them. But he does like really lay out kind of the early ideas behind strong logistics and decisive points and mobility, and yeah, uh, so he uses metaphors a lot to describe things. um, so the moral law or discipline in unity of command, um, heaven or weather factors, earth or the terrain, the commander, method and discipline. These are all ideas that he um, kind of brought to people's attention in a really coherent way. And well, so I think one thing that's talked about with Sun Tzu, since like we don't know if he existed. It could have been like it was a collection of stuff that other people wrote. But one thing that became apparent when I read Sun Tzu was that a lot of the um, way stuff is phrased is it's said like it's common knowledge at the time, but not universal common knowledge. And so it's like the book is an attempt to bring common knowledge from different places about military theory into one comprehensive text. Which, if that's true, that's really valuable for the time. And who knows if Sun Tzu did it or if that's just a made up name. Um, but yeah, so I mean, there's no need to really um, expand too much on what Sun Tzu wrote, but reading his stuff is it's enjoyable. It's weird, it's weird reading like these like old texts with like really really old texts with a little kind of goofy language to us, and um, but also just like seeing like some like ideas we know are like incredible, and it's like, oh wow, being able to like see kind of the origins of it is it's nice, and it's definitely enjoyable, and you will learn stuff from it. But you can you can read Jomini and Clausewitz and Fuller and still get that stuff. I gotta take a little aside here for a second and give a shout out. Forgot to do it at the beginning of the video. But the Principles of War podcast, while I obviously don't like the Australian military and don't agree with the politics of the man running the Principles of War podcast and how he's doing this for NCOs in the Australian military to teach them, which is going to help with not good stuff. But as far as a podcast and an educational front to teaching this stuff, I think leftists should be listening to his podcast. Again, Principles of War podcast. If you search it on YouTube, it's done by an Australian man, um, and he talks a lot about the Australian World War II campaigns, and the use of the principles of war within those campaigns, and so I've learned a lot in it, and I still have like, he's been doing it for a while now. It has a lot of episodes, so I still haven't gotten through it all, but I think everyone should listen to it. Just wanted to give him a shout out, even though we're like in a sense enemies, but I'm not here to fight with everyone. I'm here to teach. So, C-Man, Clausewitz. He was Prussian. He's got a weird history with allegiances. There's no need to get into it. It was around the same time as Jomini. He is, I think I already said Prussian. His texts are in German, and I mean they're obviously translated. So the reason I bring this up is that reading translated German for English speaking audience is a little more difficult than reading other stuff, reading other translated languages, or reading English. It's just something that was written in English with that intention in mind. German, their sentence structure is way more complex, and I think this is part of the reason why some interesting ideas have come out of Germany or Prussia, that area, out of the German language, because the complexity of the sentence structure allows for potentially more complex ideas. In English, we're very basic. We introduce something, we resolve it not long later in a sentence. Even our longer sentences are typically on the shorter side for a German sentence, which can make uh, grammatically and for just kind of reading comprehension in general, it can make German pretty difficult to read, especially for like ADHD people when the thought is just not ending and there's just so much being added to the thought that goes on for like almost a paragraph sometimes. It's a lot. So I wouldn't say that like you're like if you can't if you have a hard time reading Clausewitz, don't feel bad. Read people dissecting Clausewitz. Watch videos on Clausewitz, his ideas, understand his ideas. Actually, like reading the words from the man himself are not of the utmost importance, especially if you're gonna have to choose someone to kind of not read. Um, you'll get his ideas through other things. The I'm not sure about all the copies of On War. My copy is very thorough and it has an actual analysis by someone of every section, every chapter, and it's very thorough. Basically breaks down like every idea he goes through, but just is able to phrase things in a way that's easier for an English mind to understand. Because not gonna get into the psychology of that, but so and so another thing about Clausewitz, as you'll see, and why like his ideas are important, but as far as pedagogy goes, he's not the best, and he's not used like universally in military education. The U.S. is obsessed with him. I'm not sure exactly where else he's taught a lot. He's not like the universal guy. He's a big guy though. Um, so discover how we may gain a preponderance of physical forces and material advantages at the decisive point. And so one thing I want to bring up here is how important the decisive point is in all these thinkers. In Clausewitz has a lot of complexity actually to his views on the decisive point. Um, his views tend to dip into like almost paradoxes, but not quite. They it's just kind of if you look at it at a surface level, because he's like obsessed with the decisive point, but he does have things to say about it later, and um has different like these like on the surface level conflicting ideas about like encirclements and their effectiveness. So he wants you to calculate moral factors, and so Clausewitz, the way he kind of thinks and talks about his theories is it's a little weird. It's so he lived during idealism in Europe, and he was big into that thought, but wasn't like dogmatic about it. I think he viewed it as a useful way to look at things, and but then would essentially kind of immediately reject it on further like kind of analysis. I think like he kind of like would use it to like set a stage of discussion and then pivot from there. And so he has this ideal form of war that he talks about a lot in the first chapter, and that ideal form of war is kind of like essentially without morality, and it's just like about like absolute violence kind of, and just turning off that human part of the brain essentially to accomplish your ends. And that's the like he basically I mean this is a big part of the first chapter too is him just being like war is horrible. It's like the worst thing that's gonna happen. We're past that now. Like it's not necessary to harp on it for military strategy in a way. And so he that's like part of his idealist view. It's just like, okay, war is horrible. Forget it. We're um we're gonna do this horrible violence and we're gonna accomplish it quickly, and it's like kind of keep it like isolated. We'll win and bam. But he obviously didn't like think that that was uh like the reality. So um he talks a lot for the rest of the chapter about the how politics then comes into play with affecting this ideal form of war. And so that's kind of why he establishes it as this idea is to kind of use it as a thought experiment to illustrate the really complex ways that politics um, interacts with military campaigns. And and within this is the the moral factors. So it the he's essentially acknowledging the inherent humanity that's within the troops, and that needs to be considered um, when issuing orders. It's something that people like forget is that just because you're in this horrible situation, that doesn't mean absolute violence. It doesn't mean absolute death. There's all kinds of really weird cases throughout war of soldiers not killing each other in all kinds of different ways, whether it's just a purely practical to recon patrol stumble onto each other and they don't fire on each other because that will, reveal like both sides to each other and start like a huge fight in an area they're not prepared to do that like for that would essentially annihilate both patrols. And then so like there's like this immediate understanding that both sides when they see each other they just slowly back away because it's like, okay, well, we found you, that's the job, we didn't have to kill you then. It's not going to be smart for us to kill you then, and that's the same for both sides. And so it leads to this like crazy situation, and then the fighting starts when those patrols get back to their units and they're like, okay, we know where they are now. um that's I've read about how stuff like that happen all the time in World War II, with all these large units coming into contact with each other. There's there's all the classic stories about soldiers in World War One, and sometimes in World War Two too. But there's I think there's definitely more incentive for killing on for individual soldiers on both sides, um, with like a big kind of moral factor in the war versus just empires duking it out in World War One. But that's a little irrelevant. But like so the like soldiers intentionally firing over the enemy because they don't want to kill them and they just want to scare them away. Yeah, stuff like that. That's all throughout um, our history is testimonies of soldiers doing that in large, especially in these like kind of large unit structures. Um, and oh, it's just like another weird example. I find this I love this story. Back in World War II, I don't remember where during the Pacific campaign. I think it was somewhat close to Japan. It might have been Okinawa. There was like some military base, and it kind of like shared a beach or something with this I don't remember if it was more of an outpost, Japanese like outpost or base that was like kind of on top of this cliff, and it overlooked this beach, and the U.S. base was like kind of tucked a little away from it. But the beach just it had no significance to either side, and so they basically just ignored it. Um, and and in contact was essentially made elsewhere. And so what happened because of this lack of need for this beach, US soldiers realized they could be on the beach without getting fired upon because it just didn't matter for the Japanese to waste ammo, have a situation where they're going to have fire returned on them, give away firing positions. They're not going to do that if they don't need to. So when the soldiers realize that, they start hanging out on the beach. They start just like chilling and sunbathing and hanging out in the ocean and stuff, and like just using it as like a lounge spot. And it's right there within firing range of this Japanese outpost, and they can just all be wiped out. But they're not. They can just do that. You know that these complicated. I know that's like less of a moral factor, but that's just what I'm talking about is how um, this ideal form of war is just very different from the reality because humans are just infinitely complicated. Um, so, okay, so make the best use of the few means at our disposal. I mean, here we're just really essentially talking about efficiency. And we all know about how efficient the military tries to be and how they're always trying to shave percentages off of this and that and how and I mean obviously that's like so important. I'm trying to simplify the phrasing.